All right, so thanks everyone for joining us today. We hold these member forums twice a year, and it's an opportunity for members and non-members to learn about different aspects of cooperative housing from different members across the world. And you know, that's one of our goals is to share best practices and to share knowledge. And so this is an opportunity for us to do that. So today, I'm just going to briefly describe what Cooperative Housing International, who we are and what we do. And then we'll move on to our guests. So we'll have Tim Ross, who's the Executive Director of the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada. And then we'll have Tom Ivey from the DotCoop Enterprises and Linda Seaborn from the Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals in Australia. And then we'll have a quick update on CHI activities and events, and and we'll have some questions at the end of the presentations. So that's basically our program for the next hour and a quarter. So Cooperative Housing International is, our mission is to unite, represent, and lead the cooperative housing and mutual self-help housing movement. We're one of the 8 sectoral organizations of the International Cooperative Alliance. We represent the housing sector. Our members are mostly associations, national associations, and federations, and some smaller organizations. We connect the cooperative housing movement in order to strengthen the movement. And then together we're united front, and our voices are louder. And so we have over 30 members from various countries on all the continents. And here's a quick little representation of our members. And so we have from basically members on each continent, and Linda from BCCM is one of our latest members. And so what we do is that, we unite the cooperative housing movement worldwide. We promote the cooperative housing model as a viable housing solution. We do that through our communications program, on social media, through our website. We share information and resources, some data, good practices. We have a resources section on our website. We also have a section that is that features many countries where cooperative housing is prominent, and it's one of the most visited pages on our website. A lot of researchers go to that section to find out about the history in particular countries, and the legal model, the financial model. So this is a section that we try and keep updated, and so we welcome any updates that come from some various countries as things evolve as they do. So and we create networking opportunities that help to create collaborations and partnerships. We do this through various events such as housing conferences, cooperative conferences, and through webinars, and then we also do advocacy work, and then the peer-to-peer knowledge exchanges. So that's kind of the gist of what we do. And so without further ado, I will present our 3 guests. So we have Tim Ross, Executive Director of CHF Canada, and I will pass it on to you, Tim, to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the cooperative housing sector in Canada.
Well, great. Thanks very much. Thanks, Julie, for the invitation to join today's member forum. Thanks for the introduction. Again, yeah, my name is Tim Ross. I'm the Executive Director of the Co-op Housing Federation of Canada. I'm based in the National Capital Region around Ottawa in Canada. It's customary now in Canada to offer a land acknowledgement in out of recognition for the harmful legacy of colonization of Indigenous peoples in Canada. So I'm speaking to you from unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory around the National Capital Region, and the process of truth and reconciliation in Canada is accounting truthfully for the harms caused by the colonization of Indigenous peoples, and committing to greater equity and better relationships. So we've actually really focused on this as an organization, and created a reconciliation toolkit for our membership. And we also mark the Day of Truth and Reconciliation in Canada on September 30th of each year. Just a little bit about us, if you wanted to advance the slides to the next one, Julie. We're a membership association of housing cooperatives, representing Canada's 2,200 housing cooperatives, just about 93,000 co-op homes in every province and territory across Canada, and home to about 250,000 people. Our members voluntarily associate with CHF Canada, and we have a very high affiliation rate. About 84% of housing co-ops in Canada choose to be members of CHF Canada because they believe in our mission to inspire, represent, and serve the co-op housing movement in Canada. And we're working towards a vision of building cooperative housing for all, in response to the recognition that we need to really grow and make more known the co-op housing model. Co-op housing in Canada represents less than 1% of the housing stock, and that percentage is actually shrinking every day in relation to other housing starts. So we have this vision to make co-op housing as well known as renting or owning, particularly in response to the housing crisis that many countries, many cities are facing. And I already spoke to the size and profile of our membership, and our main business really comes down to two functions: member services in the form of advice, education, member education and training, as well as financial and planning services for our membership. And advocacy as well. You can see there a photo of Brittany Lane Housing Cooperative in Edmonton. Some members doing some sidewalk chalk during the pandemic to share some messages of positivity. If you go to the third slide, one of the things that Julie asked me to speak to some of our successes in recent years, and a part of our success has been really mobilizing strong public awareness campaigns, particularly around election periods. So we had a federal election in 2021, and we supported a vote housing coalition. We were one of the lead partners in a vote housing coalition that actually built a supporter base of hundreds of thousands of fairly active supporters during the 2021 election, and helped to create a narrative around housing as an issue. So when the election was over, we actually realized some significant commitments with the federal government to invest more significantly in co-op housing. In Canada, the Prime Minister publishes mandate letters to the cabinet members, and in the basically those are the marching orders for the cabinet ministers. So in the mandate letters to both the ministers of housing and the minister of finance were some points to expand co-op housing in Canada. So that was quite a success. We also have been working to promote the cooperative identity and the cooperative advantage as well. So in November, we actually we commissioned some research to really speak to the cooperative advantage. And if you want to go to the next slide, Julie, I wanted to highlight that in November, we published a report called the Co-op Difference, comparing co-op and market rents in 5 Canadian cities. So this report, we have access to a lot of our members' administrative data, particularly their monthly housing charges, and we use that information to compare what's happening in housing, co-op housing charges to what's happening in the market. And we actually were able to prove that co-op housing is actually becoming more affordable over time relative to market, which is a very unique value proposition when you can actually prove it in the numbers. So our report compared the occupancy or housing charges of co-ops and compared them to similarly aged rental properties in the private market. And we examined housing charges in 5 Canadian cities between 2006 and 2021. The report shows that the evolution in rental costs in nonprofit housing co-ops differ dramatically from that of the private rental sector, where rents have increased over 20% nationally in the last year alone. So the report found that housing charges in co-ops have historically been lower than rents in comparable buildings in the private market, and the gap has widened over time. In the early years of the study period, that gap was $150 to $200 per month, less than comparable market rental buildings, and that gap has widened to $400 to $500 per month on average across the sample group in recent years. So that report is available on our website if you'd like to have a look. But that has really shown some of the unique value of co-op housing in Canada, using the robust administrative data that we have access to through our membership, and a related entity called the Agency for Cooperative Housing, and comparison to statistics on market rents in Canada. If you want to go to the next slide, one of the other areas where we've really been focusing in response to identifiable, measurable member need is really focusing on some community development after the pandemic. So we've launched a number of resources and workshops to support conversations around how to rebuild community after the pandemic. Co-ops that operate with stronger community connections often help to reinforce positive governance and management outcomes of the cooperative. So that's why we're focusing on that. So this is what's displayed here is a canvas that came from one of our workshops, a live canvas that came out of one of our workshops. And something that we've been able to reproduce as a poster, just to start conversations about rebuilding community in housing cooperatives. This coincides with another challenge that I just wanted to register as well, and one that we'll be starting to address more robustly when we seek a mandate from our members through a resolution at our upcoming annual general meeting in Ottawa. We're finding a significant labor shortage is creeping into the co-op housing property management and staff sector of our membership. So we'll be working, we'll be looking to engage our members and property managers and staff of housing cooperatives to help with the professionalization and the recruitment to this important sector. The sound management of housing cooperatives is very integral to our success, especially as we are positioning for more growth overall. The last highlight that I wanted to raise with you is a bit more of a success story. So on the next slide, so those we did follow up with I mentioned those mandate letters earlier, and we did continue to work through with our advocacy team to design a federal program to reinvest in new co-op housing supply in Canada. So in 2022, the finance minister announced as a part of the federal budget a $1.5 billion federal commitment to launch the first federal co-op housing supply program in Canada in more than 30 years. And also quite uniquely, the federal budget named my organization, the Co-op Housing Federation of Canada, as a responsible party in the co-design of that program, which is quite unique in the Canadian policymaking and program context. Normally, programs are developed as a secret process with a bit of public consultation, but things go back into a black box for discussions and proposals to cabinet through a memorandum to cabinet and Treasury Board. But CHF Canada has actually been brought in as a co-design partner to make sure that the program that the federal government is designing will actually be quite workable for our sector. So that process has been ongoing, and we're hoping to realize some government direction to launch that program, announce the launch of that program later this year. And this really builds on the success of some of our long-term asset and financial planning services. As an organization, we've helped to realize hundreds of millions of dollars in public and private reinvestment in co-op housing in the last 5 years. So those are just a few highlights from the Canadian context, and I'll just close with the slide of so that you can jot down my email or our website if you'd like to get in touch to learn more about what's happening with our association. So thanks very much. I'll pass it back to you, Julie.
Thank you, Tim, for that quick update. I know it's hard to wrap it all up in a few slides. The housing sector in Canada has been very active, and it's also because we're a large country with quite a few provinces, and each province is doing their own development. Some more than others. There's a lot of information to wrap up. So thank you, Tim, for that. Does anyone have, I'm just going to take a couple of questions from anyone who might have some questions or comments for Tim. Yeah, Pete from Abbey Co-op.
I noticed in these 5 cities that you chose to do your study on in terms of rental costs that Quebec was missing. Is there a separation between French and English-speaking Canada?
Some call it the two solitudes, and we do have membership in Quebec of regional co-op housing federations and the provincial confederation, though we don't have access to that granular administrative data. So we were not able to include any Quebec cities in our study. So that's the reason why we if we had access to the data, we would have certainly included the Montreal and Quebec as well.
And I had a second question about the Vote Housing campaign. One of the things I've noted in France is that cooperatives don't really make the public aware that they are cooperatives. And do you feel that there is any value in really making it clear that housing cooperatives are cooperatives? With a sign on the building or something like that, but making it really, people walk in front of the building and they see this is a cooperative.
I think it's very important to own the narrative and be active promoters of the cooperative identity. It's actually been quite critical to the success of our federal and provincial lobbying that politicians actually come to our doors and meet members and know the co-op difference. It's been very essential in our success.
Any other questions for Tim? Linda?
Yeah, my question is, so when you were talking about the labour shortage impacting on the property management of the co-ops, how big are the co-ops that you're talking about?
That's another factor. The average size of Canadian housing cooperatives is very small in comparison to international comparators. So the average size of a housing co-op in Canada is 40 units. So one of our strategic focus areas is actually to try to facilitate, where there's willingness to do so, more unified governance structures to create some economies of scale in governance and management of cooperatives. And we've had a few pilot projects that have been successful in doing that and creating more stability in both governance and management of housing co-ops, while also creating more capacity for new development as well.
Yeah, and generally your co-ops are rental co-ops?
Generally, yes. There are some equity co-ops in Canada where you can realize a gain, though it's a much smaller part of the co-op housing sector in Canada.
Yeah, thanks.
Just following up on that, Tim, I'd heard, I don't remember where, that there was increasing consideration of new co-ops being equity. Is that there truth to that rumor, or what's going on with that discussion?
I think we're generally open to using the cooperative business model, both in non-profit continuing co-ops as well as for home ownership. Though our membership is predominantly non-profit continuing housing cooperatives, so that's where we're mostly focused.
And you expect with the new money to continue that as the focus?
At least for the federal investment in the new co-op housing supply program, it's our expectation and understanding that it will be for nonprofit continuing housing cooperatives, though there are some other federal programs that we could look at stacking into this to create some mixed models. There's some dedicated financing programs for first-time home buyers and affordable home ownership opportunities as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a quick question about the research, Tim. How have you used that research? Have you has it come in handy in terms of the advocacy work that CHF Canada does? Just curious to see how it was how it was applied.
Certainly through our advocacy, through as well some of our media engagement, public engagement. It's been one of our key talking points since the research was published. Prior to that, it was all fairly anecdotal. We kind of knew that co-ops were relatively more affordable than market. We just didn't have it quantified. So this provided a very good base of evidence on that point.
Great. All right. So if there are no further questions, Tom.
Just one last question. I just wanted to ask. That's okay. Just a quick one to ask Tim. Are you going to be, or is CHF going to be at Montreal at the Global Innovation Cooperative Summit in October? Do you know?
We certainly are. Actually, I've committed to bring my full board and staff, and we'll be sponsoring the event. So hope to see others there as well.
Great. Yes, I'll be in contact if that's okay. I'd love to connect with you and to discuss further collaboration. Thank you.
Great.
And we're also doing a panel discussion on circular housing. So watch out for us there. All right. Well, Tom, the floor is yours. You're next. So if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Julie. And yes, great to hear about the work that Tim was talking about, and it links on very well with what I wanted to talk about. And in fact, I might have even used CHF as an example if I didn't know that you were already going to be covering the subject. So I may have seen some of you before, or you might have seen me. My name's Tom, and I've joined the Cooperative Network about 7 years ago, and I've been working to promote cooperatives ever since, primarily through my role here at DotCoop as an advocate for cooperative identity and branding. And for those of you that don't know, that DotCoop is the global registrar, the custodian, if you will, of the cooperative identity tools, which is what we call the .coop domain name and the mark. And we have the verification process that allows this to be a cooperative only space. So I'm going to be talking today a little bit about how cooperative branding and identity can work in the digital sphere and for education of the public. So I will move on to saying, first of all, I'd like to say, does anybody here know, or are they from even Sanford Housing Cooperative in the UK? I just wanted to check first, because if they are, it'd be great to hear from you first person, because I'm going to be using them as a case study in a minute. It doesn't seem so I'll move on to the value of a brand. So we're all, I'm sure you're all very well versed on how branding works, and we can see it in action every day. We know how much it has an impact on our lives, but I'd just like to highlight really why so many organizations invest extremely heavily in developing a brand and having a very cohesive and powerful image for their organizations. And that comes well from a Harvard Business Review. This was done in 2015, called The New Science of Customer Emotions. And that survey basically headlined that those clients that connect with a brand will be twice as economically viable as those that are merely extremely satisfied, be they a customer or a service user. And this is really what they're talking about here is brand advocates, creating advocates for a brand. And people that have become emotionally invested or connected with the identity of an organization or with what an organization is doing. And this is fantastic news. This is really good for cooperatives, because from my experience in the cooperative network, our strength is that we naturally have advocates for the cooperative business model, and we create advocates when we work doing what we do. My joy in my role is seeing people that have no idea what a co-op is and transform into these real evangelists for the model. And I see that all the time. I even went through that discovery myself. So the keystone, I should say, of using this cooperative identity as an influence on the economic potential, the cooperative differences, as Tim mentioned it, a cooperative advantage. The keystone of that is by using a process to create cooperative advocates, to make that as easy as possible, and then connecting that advocacy to the business or organization that we're part of. And that sounds like a very big thing to say, and it's all very well, but how do we do this? But ultimately, we're aiming to maximize the visibility of our brand as cooperatives, enough to, when we reach a tipping point, when those that have no prior exposure to cooperatives are using the brand to then seek the network out. So the most simple solution would be to use the cooperative identity tools so that people can find cooperatives, even if they have no prior understanding of the model. This connects with what Pete said about education of the public, and keeping them in a position where they can easily connect with this ecosystem. So the identity tools are a cornerstone of this, so I'd like to talk a little bit more about how this works as a foundation, as a starting point, and to show you a case study as well. So some of these case studies are quite comprehensive. Please don't feel overwhelmed. Even the smallest change in an organization can have a difference, like an email address or an email signature file, just before people start worrying about the concept of huge rebrands and how much that's going to cost. But I'd like to talk to you first about, this is Sanford Housing Cooperative. So I picked them because they're not only the first purpose-built housing cooperative in the UK, but they've been running for about 50 years now, and it's home to about 120 people. Interestingly, connecting exactly with what Tim said, their rent in their particular area of London is significantly, I think 2/3, if I remember correctly, below comparable market rates in housing around them in that area. So they become a great case study for this in a very, very competitive market. But a crucial part of their identity is the way that they particularly say use their domain name. Here, they have chosen sanford.coop. You can say that in the middle next to their logo, which at a glance, even if you know nothing else about this organization, you have an inkling of where they are. You know that they're in Sanford, and the fact that they're also a cooperative. And in a huge list of search results, that's really important information at a glance if people are looking for housing or they're looking in a particular area. That's going to jump out straight away. And this is one of the key parts, because .coop domain names, for example, are protected with about 9,000 registered globally at the moment, and that leaves a huge amount of potential. At the bottom, I've got an example there. I just decided to check out what was available, and I saw that houses.coop as a domain name is available for $75 a year, which I know for a fact it causes those that work in the domain name industry in the .com or commercial markets, it causes them to sweat because they cannot believe that these sort of things are available on the open market at the moment, or how much it would cost to secure the same sort of thing as the .com. So these sort of really powerful assets are there for cooperatives to be able to use and to connect with. So if we can move on to the next case study there, Julie, because this is something I'd like to see. I did see actually that CHF were using the mark on their website as a brand signifier. Here's an example from South America. This is Confea Cooperativa. You can see how really they've synchronized their logo, the mark underneath their name as a brand signifier. That's the differentiator for their organization. And some of you may have seen the Mid-Counties Cooperative here in the UK have just done a huge rebrand, and CEO Phil Ponsonby was a panelist at the World Cooperative Congress back in December last year. And they too, like Confea, have adopted the mark as a major part of their branding. And that's to really connect that instant link between the image and the business model, which works very well when synchronized with other digital assets. And on to the next case study there. Thank you, Julie. So, and this is my personal favorite because I had a chat with Jose Perez of the Health Cooperative recently, and you can see how they've managed to sort of create this really seamless branding around their organization. Their name is the International Health Cooperative Organization. They are now known as Health Co-op. They've integrated the mark into their organization and have adopted health.coop as their main domain name. So then now know, or Jose told me that now their members know them informally, and those that work with them as the Health Co-op. That's who they are. If people are looking for health services, they look for the Health Cooperative. And since doing their rebrand, they noticed a distinct markup in the number of hits to their website that they were getting for people that were seeking cooperative healthcare, purely from the fact that they had this really distinctive branding that highlighted what their organization was all about. So let's move on to the next one. Great. So this is really just, again, to highlight the fact that it's a crowded space out there. It's a crowded world, particularly when you're competing with other market forces and people are looking for a solution such as housing in a particular area, and particularly in the domain sphere, the digital sphere. This is a place where content is very cheap and very fast to produce. New things are coming out all the time. Having a cooperative domain namespace that's reserved just for our business model really is an incredible asset. And it really only comes into its own if it's adopted by the movement. It's owned by the movement, it's owned by the community, so it just needs to be there to be adopted. And as part of a wider brand, this will be an identifier for cooperatives within not only within their own ecosystem, but then also outwardly to the public. It's going to be very difficult to define what a cooperative is and to get that package of information into a passerby, into one of the general public who aren't understanding of the model. But if we can use strong imagery and strong signifiers of what we are, then we don't have to define ourselves. We don't have to put that huge amount of information behind it. It becomes something that people accept or investigate under their own power. So let's move on to the next slide. So yeah, this is just an example of how the different ways that you can use the identity tools. As I said before, it can be quite overwhelming to hear about these huge big rebrands, but there's a lot of smaller ways we can use the tools to highlight who we are and to signify what we are. All of those examples there are ways of doing it, but ultimately all of these small examples work to one thing, which is using the power of the cooperative brand to own our own space in the digital sphere, to either cover a region or an activity or otherwise. By being creative and maybe using extra web pages or content, we can improve our footprint as a network online and make ourselves a main player in the area of activity. Particularly for housing, an example of this would be, yes, of course, you can use an acronym for your domain name if that's your business organization, but you could also say, if you're in a particular area, use parishousing.coop or kenyahousing.coop alongside your normal domain name in order to funnel people that are going to be searching for that service in your area into, they could read about you and be part of your network. So that's really where the economic advantage of having a strong brand comes in. So it all contributes to that end goal. Okay, and then on to the last slide. So I'd also just like to cover briefly the global directory and map as well. So this is something that comes as part of the verification for both the .coop domain name and the mark. Is we've been working with other cooperative organizations, particularly one called Digital Commons, who created a open source data hub called the Global Directory, which is then being used to create maps. And these maps, our particular one shows all domain using cooperatives globally. It's data that is only publicly available, but it is also starting to feed in from other data sets, and other large organizations are starting to feed into this open source network, which is going to build on that data set and create this hub of cooperative knowledge to really shine a light on the visibility of the movement, to see people or see organizations that normally aren't that visible, which is going to be extremely important, a very valuable tool for P6, for working together into cooperative trade, and just finding local ecosystems around you as well. So this is something that I was very keen to highlight as an attribute, because in the future, hopefully, as it builds up, it will become a good tool for not only cooperatives to find each other, perhaps for the general public to also find cooperatives if they're looking for something in their local area. So that's something that also forms part of the cooperative identity, the identity tools. So thank you. So yes, just as Tim mentioned, I'd love to work together. We are working hard on creating case studies and promoting the work of cooperatives in their own areas, and to synchronize with them to do things like events or webinars, as Julie's kindly had us on board to talk about things like this. So we'd love to work together with you. If you have something similar, or a way of collaborating, or a case study you'd like to bring to our attention, please get in touch at the tom@identity.coop email address there, because it would be great to work together to continue building this the collaboration and celebration, I should say, of the work being done by all the different players in the movement. So thank you very much. And I see Pete already has a question for me.
Yeah, I have a question about the naming rules, because it seems to me that if, for instance, the health.coop domain name, if the health organization concerned is only limited to one country, it seems to be strange that it should be health.coop and that would be an international name. Whereas if it was health.france.coop or something like that would make more sense to me if the organization is limited to one country or one region. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, absolutely. Essentially, it's a balancing act when you're looking at a domain name, because on one hand, the more information you can have in your domain name at the top, the more that people are going to be able to understand exactly what you are at a glance. So certainly, if you're regional, becoming the default organization that crops up on a search engine when you're based in, say, just France, so healthfrance.coop or something like that, that's extremely valuable. However, you also have to balance that against the fact that you don't want something too long, or you don't want to pack too much information in that it's going to become unwieldy. So, and there are other rules and conventions that have to be abided by. Sometimes there are restrictions on certain domain names. Country name domains tend to be restricted purely because those are mostly aimed at an apex or a national body. Also, there are premium names, which are names of such value that they hold a higher premium over others. So if you were to choose something as straightforward as, say, I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, maybe agriculture.coop, or something like that, then those are charged at a higher premium because of their value. Having said that, because of the huge variety that we have in the domain name industry at the moment, and the fact that we have 9,000 domain names available, you can really at the moment pick almost anything and it be available at the baseline price via registrar. So for example, houses.coop or something like that. So the chances of you having something that's a very close match for either organization or for your local area and sector, then the chances are very, very high. I hope that answers your question.
We have another question from Elizabeth and Nanke.
Yes, I'm Nanke, and we are a very small co-op near Bloor and Yonge in Toronto, Canada. We do not yet have a website, and we are looking at developing that. And would it be your suggestion that we also use co-op as part of our domain name when we get to that point?
Well, if by using it as part of your domain name, it really depends on how you would structure your domain. Some organizations will keep it as short as possible, so they will use the bit after the dot co-op, to imply that the organization is a cooperative. So for example, so that's how health.coop do it. They but some organizations will prefer to have their full name, so they will say they're the housing cooperative .coop. It's sort of it's really a way of deciding how you want your organization name to come across. But I feel personally that the .coop is enough of a signifier to indicate that the organization in question is a cooperative, and it's of a benefit to keep the domain name succinct so that people can A, remember it, or B, won't make a mistake when typing it in, something like that. So certainly, yes, when setting something like that up, there's a few options available to you.
How do we learn about what to think about in choosing domain names, websites, structure, and all of that?
There's a number of different areas. If you're starting off from a blank sheet and you'd like to begin, then there's a couple of different ways you can go about it. You can engage with a web service provider, of which there are cooperative ones around the world, and we are more than happy to help with that. .coop and me specifically, I can be a first port of call for people wanting to find out information about different organizations that can help with web services. So I can then sort of point you to organizations that will help either set up the whole package so they can design the website for you, they can give you advice on domain names that would work well with your organization, and then set up the associated services such as your hosting and your emails and things like that. The other option, which would take a little bit more research, would be to do things yourself. And again, I can provide pointers on the tools and software that you could use to do that. But again, it's that's a little bit more of a sort of a more complicated process, because you'd have to do everything individually. So there's a few options, but great. Yeah, no, that's no problem at all. Again, certainly for the use of the domain name, I would say to get in touch with me, because I could give you a lot more information, and then we have a wide network of sort of service providers and other people that we can point you to for whatever your needs are, really. So
Thank you.
no problem at all.
All right. Thanks, Tom, for presenting information on the co-op identity. Very important for our sector. And just as a point of information, our domain name is housinginternational.coop. We opted to keep the international in there, but you know, it's a thought to buy the housing.coop domain for sure, but we'll have that discussion later. All right, so time is kind of flying here, and so next we have Linda Seaborn from the Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals in Australia. So welcome, Linda, and thanks for joining us so late. It's nighttime. It must be midnight now in Australia.
Getting there, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for staying up so late.
Hello, everyone. As you know, my name's Linda Seaborn, and I work for the Business Council of Cooperatives and Mutuals, and we have recently become a member of Cooperative Housing International, which we're very happy about. And I work primarily on housing policy at the BCCM, so we don't have a national peak for housing specifically. So BCCM is across all of the housing sectors. Right, so as well as working for the BCCM, I've also been a housing cooperative member most of my adult life, and I live in a housing co-op in Hobart, which is the capital city of Tasmania, the island state in Australia. And at this point, I'll acknowledge that Tasmania is Lutruwita, it's its Aboriginal name. It's the land of the Palawa people. Ownership's never been ceded, and we don't have a treaty in place in Australia. I pay my respects to the Palawa as the owners of this land, and in keeping with tradition, I pay my respects to their elders past and present. And it was interesting to hear you, Tim, that's common to do that in Canada these days as well too. It's good. So I'm going to talk about the whole of Australia, the housing co-op sector, because, you know, we're new here in Cooperative Housing International. So just give you a bit of an introduction of the housing co-op sector in Australia and the current environment, and then I'm just going to show you a little bit about my recent trip to New York City and the part of the co-op sector that I explored there, and at the end I'll tell you a little bit about the co-op that I live in particular. So in Australia there are about 8,000 homes cooperatively managed, about 3,000 are in Victoria, 3,000 in New South Wales. They're our two most populous states, and the other 2,000 are around the rest of the country. The BCCM are progressively mapping the sector, and we know that those numbers that I just told you are still an underrepresentation, but it's our currently best available data. So the housing co-op sector in Australia is made up of 4 strands. We've got privately owned housing cooperatives and 3 different types of rental cooperatives. So all the rental cooperatives do not have member equity. So they come into existence through government-supported community housing programs, programs for Aboriginal housing, or predecessor historical funding programs. And this picture here, Plandex, is one of the rental housing cooperatives in Sydney. The largest sector that we have are rental cooperatives who are organised under what's called common equity companies. And this means the properties are held by the common equity company, and the housing co-ops are members of the common equity company, and then each co-op manages their tenancies, finance and maintenance of their co-op. So this is Murrindaka Cooperative in Melbourne. They're a member of one of the common equity companies, so they manage their co-op autonomously, but the property is owned by the common equity. So this model allows for some of the administrative burden of being regulated to be collectivised and managed at the company level, and also allows for the potential aggregation of the property portfolio to borrow against to enable growth. And the largest of these companies, Common Equity Housing Limited in Victoria, has over 2,000 properties, and it's growing. Common Equity Housing Limited is the most successful example of the common equity model. Due to conditions particular to them, just their size, the nature of the relationship with the state government that allows them to be quite independent and autonomous, the way the organisation was established, including it had capacity for property development itself at the time it was established, and it happens to be in the state that has the most commitment to ongoing funding for housing cooperatives. We believe there's potential for similar growth in the 3 other states that have common equity companies. But in each of these cases, we've got some work to do with those state governments to reduce the burdens on cooperatives. And in particular, that we've got some unfinished business where they're supposed to hand over title to the cooperatives, and they haven't done it yet. But we think all these issues are resolvable, and we're hoping that our combined advocacy will get each of these common equity companies to a point where they can grow like common equity in Victoria. And that said, we have got growth happening in all the states. It's just a little bit slower. The other 2 rental sectors that we have are the rental co-ops that are more independent, not with the common equity companies, and the housing that's managed by the Aboriginal cooperatives. We're currently trying to map all of the Aboriginal cooperative housing sector. So many of them were developed back in the 1970s, prior to most of the rest of the housing co-op sector. And later, Aboriginal organisations might not be registered as cooperatives, but they're what's called a community controlled organisation. And so that functions in a way that we would recognise as a cooperative. And the other housing co-ops, they're autonomous. They range in size from 5 houses to pretty big with over 400 houses. This is the sector that the common equities evolved from. So this one here, Stocko Student Cooperative, that's one of the independent cooperatives. And these were largely funded in the 1980s, back in the days when the federal government had an objective of developing a housing cooperative sector in Australia, which was an exciting time. That's when my co-op was funded. The privately owned cooperative housing sector provides over 1,000 units of housing, largely in rural land sharing communities, and mostly in one state, New South Wales, that had a planning policy to accommodate them. But as we've been mapping the sector, we have found them in every state. So in general, in Australia, we've had government cycles that we saw a run of federal governments in the 1970s and 80s that believed very much in the principle that people who use services should have a say in running them. And that's when we saw the investment in the urban rental cooperatives. That's when the rural land sharing ones got up. And that's also when the Aboriginal community controlled housing thrived. Since then, we've had a period of government that's, like many countries have, more focused on more traditional business models, and which meant that they invested a lot with experts providing housing for us rather than us providing it for ourselves. However, we have a new federal government, and we have a Prime Minister who grew up in public housing, and we have a Federal Housing Minister who grew up in public housing. There's changes happening. So Aboriginal services are coming back under community control, out of government control and into community control. And in general, there's a more optimistic environment for resident-run affordable housing cooperatives. Just to explain a bit about the funding environment in Australia. So most revenue is raised by the federal government, and then they disperse it to the state governments to run programs. So the programs are run at the state level, even though the money comes from the federal government. And the current Australian government has a bill that they're trying to pass to fund the next era of affordable housing. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it because it hasn't passed, and it's getting hammered by the Greens and the lefts to actually go further. So we don't fully know what it's going to look like yet. Another way that we fund affordable housing is that the Australian government pays rent assistance to low-income households so that rents can be sufficient to sustain low-cost housing. So that funding flows across into our rental cooperatives as well. And we're seeing opportunities in Australia to strengthen and grow the existing rental co-op sector, to collaborate with the Aboriginal housing sector to reinvigorate the cooperative model, which is very fit for purpose in traditional management methods. And we would like to introduce the limited equity housing co-op model into the Australian market. With our rental cooperatives, the larger rental housing co-op organisations are organised into the Australian Cooperative Housing Alliance. So you can see there, that's the 4 common equity companies. And they were successful in securing a substantial research grant to work on a project which identifies the value that differentiates cooperative housing from other forms of rental housing. And I think this complements that research that you're talking about in Canada, Tim, which I have seen, because this one is to do with the experience of people that living in the housing cooperative. So the qualitative experience of the autonomy and the control and the benefits that come from that, rather than the financial ones that you focused on. So the initial publication was a methodological review, which you can see there. And the final research is due to be published in June this year, which we're really looking forward to. And I'd encourage everybody to look out for it, because I think that the findings are going to be very helpful, or they're going to be very helpful for us. And I think other people will find them helpful as well in being able to articulate why we really like this form of housing. So before I briefly show you my co-op, I'm just going to show you a little bit about my trip to New York. My daughter lives here. She lives in Brooklyn. So when I was visiting her, I just took a bit of extra time to have a look at the co-ops. And firstly, I was staying in an area where I knew there was a large co-op called Kingsview Homes, and I went looking for it. On the way there, I found this one here, Clinton Hill Cooperative Apartments, which I looked up, and it had been built for some Navy workers from the nearby Navy yards and converted to a co-op. And I knew the area I was staying in was a historic district, and I knew that old mansions had been knocked down to build the co-op. So I took this photo here of a mansion next door, because I was writing a story for my friends, and it illustrated, you know, the kind of places that had been knocked down. And then I found out that building is a co-op. It goes a long way back. It's been divided up into these very nice apartments on the inside. And that's when I realized I could not stop and take photos of all of the housing co-ops in New York. They are everywhere. So I decided to focus on seeing the historically significant ones. So this one here, Alku Toinen, and it's next to Alku, the first US housing co-ops in Sunset Park, set up by the Finnish immigrants in 1916. I'll assume people know about them or can Google them. They're great to read about. The next couple of pictures is the cooperative village, made up of 4 co-ops, amalgamated dwellings, East River Co-op, Hillman Houses and East River Houses. And these were built by the clothing workers unions from 1930 to 1955. Again, very exciting housing cooperatives. But all of these ones that I've showed you so far, both those slides, Most of them are not particularly affordable now. They were when they're built, but they're not now. So I was really interested in the housing co-ops that continue to be affordable. And Peter, you might see someone you recognise in this next slide. So that's where these guys come in. Dick Heitler and Andy Riker from UHAB, the Urban Homesteading Assistance Board. And it was great to learn about this form of housing cooperative, you know, having come out of a housing activist movement in the 1970s, working with tenants to fix up apartments that landlords had abandoned, converting them into co-ops. And Dick and Andy both live in co-ops themselves. Andy in an old tenement building with about 20 apartments in. That's one of the UHAB co-ops, and Dick in a large Mitchell Lama co-op of about 2,000 apartments. And I won't go too much into all those models. I'll assume people either know or can look them up. But Dick's also one of the founders of an organisation to keep the Mitchell Yama co-ops from moving to a market model and so that they will stay affordable. And it sounds like it's been a very successful movement, which is very exciting. And so the picture of the large building there, it's another really well-known co-op called Penn South in Chelsea in Manhattan, nearly 3,000 units. And they're one of the Mitchell Lama co-ops that has opted to stay affordable. So what I found in New York was there's a lot of diversity in housing co-ops and a lot going on. Very big, a huge amount of unaffordable housing co-ops as well, but they weren't the ones that I was so interested in. So now we get to the end. This is my co-op. So this is where I live. It's called the Co-Housing Cooperative. We were an early adopter of the .co-ops. We've got co-housing .coop. And we live in the foothills of the mountain here, Kunanyi. We have 12 houses and we feel very lucky, and we want more people to have the opportunity to have the affordable, secure houses with the agency and control over their lives that we do, living in our co-op. Our contact details, so I'll provide this as a PDF available to people if you don't have to write it down now. And us, that's us, the BCCM, Business Council of Co-ops and Mutuals. That was all right. I think I was in 10 minutes, wasn't I? Just.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Thank you so much. Yeah. And thanks for sharing some information about your trip to New York. It's, you know, this is one of the advantages of being part of the wider movement is that we're able to connect different actors and you know, through you know, when they're traveling the world and wanting to visit co-ops wherever they may be visiting. And I also want to highlight that the research that both Linda and Tim have mentioned are featured on our website, on our resources page, and I'll have a slide to that effect in a couple of minutes. But in the meantime, any questions for Linda, either about New York or Australia? Anyone? Well, if not, I have a question. I'm curious to know about the percentage of government assistance that people, you know, that like the number of units, like the percentage of units in the co-ops that in Australia that are receiving government assistance, or the rental assistance that you mentioned, versus those that don't, or does it vary from, you know, from state to state?
It would vary from state to state, but it would be quite high, I think. So in my co-op, everybody that comes into the co-op needs to be eligible for public housing. So they would all be receiving the rent assistance, and that would phase out as people's incomes go up. But housing cooperatives, so since we got the original push to get developed when we were low to middle income, we've been kind of lumped in with the mainstream social housing and pushed more towards welfare housing. And so I think that a lot of people living in housing cooperatives would be eligible for assistance. Not all, but a lot. So say 65-70% at a rough guess.
Okay, thanks. Roughly the same as here in Canada. I would, maybe a little bit higher. Dominador from the Philippines, you have a question.
Yes, hello. Good evening. Time check is 10 p.m. here in the Philippines. Can cooperative housing really eradicate the main problem here in the Philippines? Mostly for the informal settler.
Yeah, that's a very, very different condition to Australia, but maybe similar to we have areas in Australia, the Aboriginal camps on traditional lands where there's not the infrastructure there to support the settlement. That would be the closest thing I think that we have to informal settlements, and the only solution we're going to have to that is going to be government funding. So I don't know how applicable that is in the Philippines, where if the funding's not there, more of a self-help model, but it would be hard, I think.
There are examples of this in various countries in South America and in Asia, where cooperative housing and other forms of community-led housing have provided housing to people in informal settlements. And there's plenty of examples of this. If you go to a website called cohabitat.org or .net, I keep forgetting which ones they are, but Cohabitat is a network of community-led housing organizations, which we're a part of, and they have a database of all the different types of community-led housing across the world, and you can see there a lot of people who were formerly in informal settlements have developed community-led housing. So I suggest that you go and have a look there. Tim, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Just on the question of security of tenure and informal settlement. Rooftops Canada launched a 5-year project last year that might be of some interest. I just pasted a link in the chat in case that's relevant. And Linda, just wanted to comment on your presentation. I was just really it was very striking how similar some of our issues are and our policy landscape. In our policy landscape. So I'd just be very happy to follow up with you afterwards, just to
I wrote
just
your
to
email
exchange
down
more.
for the
Yeah.
same reason. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of similarities between our countries and the style of government, and it even sounds like the phases that we've been through with the cycles in government, with you having a sort of a resurgence of interest in cooperatives at the federal level at the moment, and I think we're about to get that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this time around we need to figure out how to set up this investment in a way that's able to withstand the ebbs and flows of political interest in supporting cooperative housing. So whereas kind of the first generation of non-market cooperative housing development in Canada created a very small and disaggregated asset base and a very well-rooted and strong one, one of the drawbacks of that model has been a lot of limitations around how to work together to continue to grow the sector. So when we look at this, as we look at the interest that the federal government now has in investing in new co-op housing supply, we need to structure the financing in a way that will allow us to maintain a continuous development capacity. So we've got some ideas on that, and that's what we're really focusing some of our discussions on. So it'd be really, I would very much appreciate an opportunity to exchange more on where we're headed and where you're headed, and maybe we can support one another.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it'd be it'd be nice to follow the progress that that you're both both the roads that you're traveling, working in collaboration with government and funding. So without further ado, I'm just going to do a quick little wrap up of some activities that Cooperative Housing International is doing at the moment. And so we're going to be at the International Social Housing Festival, which is taking place in Barcelona from June 6 to 9. And we're also going to be holding a board meeting and a strategic planning session to map out our future work. So we are involved in a couple of panel discussions, one on housing models and frameworks for environmental and social sustainability on June 7, and then the next day, community-led housing for students and youth and seniors. The festival received so many submissions that they asked us to combine 2-3 different workshops together. So we had to kind of adapt and meld in with some other sessions. Okay, here the next one is going to be in Ireland in 2025, I think. And just to go over some of our resources that we have available, we have a YouTube channel where this recording is going to be uploaded. We also do a podcast called Co-op Conversations, and you can listen to it or you can watch it on our YouTube channel. We have a video version of it. Our latest 2 episodes were with an organization called Multipro, which is in Nicaragua, and they're working with people to build cooperative housing, to develop cooperative housing, and to also educate on the cooperative model. And so this one is in Spanish, and then we interviewed 2 people from Japan, a cooperative called the Sumu Yakushima Housing Cooperative. It's on the island called Sumu Yakushima, and just a very interesting small cooperative, a group of people. I think it's more of it's an equity cooperative. A group of people who have built this co-op together, and with the aim of living close to nature and in harmony with nature. So so go have a listen. It's really interesting to hear about them. And yeah, all of our forums are on there, and we also have a series of videos on like small explainer videos that explain what is cooperative housing, how is it different from other housing models, how are they financed, how are they governed, and they're just like short little 2-minute videos that are great for sharing when people want to know like what's co-op housing all about, and they're in 3 languages, in French, Spanish, and in English. And the podcasts are a great way as well for people to learn about, what's it like to live in a housing co-op, and the best way to find that out is by talking to people who actually live in one. So some great conversations there. So we have 14 episodes so far with over 17 downloads. So and I hear that most podcasts never make it past the 3rd episode. So I guess we're in this for the long run. And if anyone has any suggestions, or if they'd be interested in being a guest on the podcast, please reach out to me. Happy to interview folks that are working or living in the housing co-op sector. And as mentioned earlier, we have a resources section at housinginternational.coop/resources, and that's where it's kind of a depository of studies and research, discussion papers, and you can search either by topic or by country or by resource type. So we have over 15 pages of resources. So it's a nice little library of international research. And so speaking of research, I had a meeting the other week with two researchers from the University of Montevideo in Uruguay, professor there who's collaborating with the Research Center for Operations Research and Statistics of the University in Leuven in Belgium. And it's research on allocating units in new housing co-ops, especially in larger housing co-ops. They're researching a way of allocating the units in an equitable way, and then so they're interested in speaking to to people in various countries to find out how how they do it, so that they can do some comparative studies. So they developed, well, the researcher in Belgium in Leuven developed an algorithm for assigning the units. So this might be of interest to folks out there. And so this research, I haven't uploaded it yet on our resources page, but I'm going to do that. But if anyone is interested in speaking to them, please reach out to me. And then I can connect you with them. So I've already connected them with our member in Austria, and so they're quite happy to have some more comparative studies. So just sharing that. And also wanted to take this opportunity to share the news of a co-operator who passed away suddenly in April, the end of April, while on a hiking holiday in Wales. Trevor James, he's very active in the co-op sector in the Netherlands. He's originally from England, but immigrated to the Netherlands in the early 80s, and has been instrumental in having tenant management having tenant-led management as a thing in the Netherlands, and he co-founded Co-op Link, which is an association linking all the different housing cooperatives in the Netherlands. The co-op sector in the Netherlands is not very big, not very strong, and so he was working with his colleagues on increasing the visibility of housing cooperatives, and just in the fall was instrumental in removing some obstacles in the housing legislation to pave the way to more cooperative housing development. And Co-op Link is also working on developing a housing association, a co-op housing association throughout Europe to unite the movement in Europe. So very sad loss, big loss for the co-op sector in the Netherlands. I don't know where it is. Well, I don't have the slide for it, but just wanted to mention also one of our members, HSB in Sweden. They're celebrating their 100th anniversary, and they have it's kind of a cool idea. They have a trailer, like a big mobile home that is traveling from city to city throughout Sweden, that is kind of showing a retrospective of cooperative housing over the past 100 years. And they have a virtual reality experience where you can go through the years of the different kitchens from when they started in the 1920s to what our kitchen's going to look like in the future. And so they're doing stops throughout the country to celebrate their 100th anniversary. And then lastly, you can follow us on social media. We're on all the main channels, and including YouTube. And then we have our website at housinginternational.coop. And yeah, if you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me at info@housinginternational.coop. So that wraps it up for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to our speakers, to Linda, Tim, and Tom, for sharing all your information and making us just more aware of what is out there, and you know, which is all about making our movement more united and stronger and more organized.
Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us. All right. Okay. Take care, everyone, and see you next time.